The sledgehammer felt heavy in Marcus Chen's hands as he stared at the crumbling concrete that had once been his family's swimming pool. 3 days of demolition had turned his backyard into a wasteland of broken dreams and shattered memories. He thought he was finally free from the nightmare that had consumed his life for 18 months. But as the police cruiser pulled into his driveway, red and blue lights cutting through the evening shadows, Marcus realized that some secrets refuse to stay buried, even when you've torn down everything trying to hide them. Part 1. The weight. Of water, the first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning in March, a hairline fracture running along the pool's western wall like a scar across Marcus Chen's carefully constructed life. He'd noticed it while drinking his coffee, standing at the kitchen window that overlooked their backyard sanctuary, the same window where his wife Sarah used to wave at him during his morning laps, before everything went wrong. It's just settling. He'd told himself then, the way people do when they need to believe in temporary solutions to permanent problems. But 18 months later, as Marcus swung the sledgehammer against the concrete for the 3rd consecutive day, he knew that some cracks can't be fixed, they can only be covered up or torn down completely. The demolition had been his idea, born from a conversation with his neighbor Pete Kowalski that had started innocently enough. Pete had been trimming his hedge, the electric clipper buzzing like an angry wasp, when he'd called over the fence. Finally getting rid of that eyesore, huh? Pete had shouted over the noise, nodding toward the empty pool that had sat drained and neglected since the previous summer. Marcus had looked up from where he'd been pulling weeds, his hands already dirty from an hour of mindless yard work, the kind of physical labor that helped quiet the voices in his head. What do you mean? The pool. Heard you telling your contractor buddy about filling it in. Smart move, if you ask me. Never seen anyone use the damn thing anyway. That had been the moment. Not a decision, exactly, but the recognition of one that had already been made somewhere deeper than conscious thought. Marcus had nodded slowly, as if Pete's assumption had revealed a truth he'd been avoiding. Yeah, he'd said, surprising himself with how easily the lie came. Time for a change. But he hadn't called a contractor. Instead, Marcus had driven to Home Depot that same afternoon and rented every piece of demolition equipment they'd let him walk out with. Sledgehammers, jackhammers, a small excavator for the weekend. The teenage clerk had looked at him with curiosity bordering on concern. Big project, the kid had asked. Something that should have been done a long time ago. Marcus had replied. Now, 3 days into the demolition, Marcus understood what he'd really been trying to do. This wasn't about removing an unused pool or increasing property value or any of the rational explanations he'd rehearsed for Sarah's inevitable questions. This was about erasure. About taking a sledgehammer to the past and reducing it to rubble that could be hauled away in a dumpster. The problem was that some things refused to be erased. Jesus Christ, Marcus, what the hell are you doing? He turned at the sound of Sarah's voice, the sledgehammer still raised above his head. She stood at the sliding glass door that led from their kitchen to the patio, her work clothes wrinkled from a long day at the law firm, her face a mixture of exhaustion and bewilderment. I told you, he said, lowering the hammer. I'm taking it down. You told me you were thinking about it. This looks like you've moved past thinking and straight into demolishing our backyard without discussion. She stepped onto the patio, her heels clicking against the stone. The neighbors are starting to ask questions. Marcus. Pete Kowalski cornered me at the mailbox today wanting to know if we're getting divorced. Are we? The question hung between them like dust motes in the late afternoon sun. Sarah's expression shifted from frustration to something harder to read. Fear, maybe, or recognition. I don't know, she said quietly. Are we? Marcus set the sledgehammer down and wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Around them, the destruction was impressive. What had once been a pristine kidney-shaped pool with integrated spa and decorative tilework now looked like a bombing site. Chunks of concrete lay scattered across what used to be their lawn. The diving board, which he'd removed with particular violence, sat in pieces near the fence. I found something, he said finally. Sarah's face went very still. What kind of something? When I was breaking up the concrete near the deep end. There's a section that's different, newer, like someone patched it recently. That's impossible. We haven't done any work on the pool since. She stopped herself, but they both knew how that sentence ended. Since last summer. Since Emma. Marcus walked to the edge of what remained of the pool and pointed to a section where his demolition work had revealed an obvious repair job. The concrete there was a slightly different color, the work clearly done by someone in a hurry who wasn't concerned with matching the original construction. "Look at it, Sarah. Really look at it." She approached reluctantly, her heels making her unsteady on the uneven ground. When she saw what he was pointing at, her face went pale. "That doesn't mean anything," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Doesn't it? Emma disappeared last July. This repair work was done sometime after that. The timing. Stop." Sarah's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Just stop." Emma ran away. "We've been through this 100 times. She was 17, she was angry, she was tired of living with rules and expectations. Kids run away all the time." "Kids run away all the time," Marcus agreed. "But they don't usually leave their insulin behind." The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Sarah looked like she wanted to say something, started to several times, then thought better of it. Finally, she turned and walked back toward the house. "I'm calling a contractor tomorrow," she said without looking back. "A real one. Someone who can fill this mess in properly and put our lives back together." "Sarah, I'm done with this conversation, Marcus. And I'm done with your theories about Emma. She's gone because she chose to be gone, not because of some conspiracy theory you've built around a patch of concrete." The sliding door closed behind her with a finality that seemed to echo across the demolished landscape. Marcus stood alone in the growing darkness, surrounded by the wreckage of their former life, and realized that his wife was afraid. Not confused or angry or frustrated, but genuinely, deeply afraid. Which meant she knew something about the concrete patch that she wasn't telling him. Marcus picked up the sledgehammer again and walked to the section of newer concrete. Under the security light that had just clicked on, he could see that someone had tried very hard to make the repair work invisible. They'd nearly succeeded. If he hadn't been tearing the whole thing apart, he might never have noticed the difference. But now that he had noticed, he couldn't stop seeing it. And more importantly, he couldn't stop thinking about the timing. Emma had vanished on July 15th. The concrete work looked like it had been done in late summer, based on the weathering patterns and the type of sealer that had been used. He raised the sledgehammer and brought it down hard on the suspicious section. The concrete cracked but didn't break. He hit it again, putting all his weight behind the blow. This time, a chunk the size of a dinner plate broke free, revealing a hollow space underneath. Marcus's hands were shaking as he knelt down and pulled out his phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness below the concrete, illuminating something that made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. It wasn't what he'd expected to find. It was worse. At the bottom of the hollow space, wrapped in what looked like a plastic top, was a collection of items that told a story Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to hear. Emma's cell phone, the screen cracked but recognizable. Her favorite necklace, the one with the small silver butterfly that Sarah had given her for her 16th birthday. And underneath those personal items, something that changed everything. A thick manila envelope with insurance documents written across the front in Sarah's careful handwriting. Marcus reached down and pulled out the envelope, his hands trembling. As he opened it, inside were life insurance policies, multiple policies, all taken out on Emma within the past 2 years. The beneficiary on every single one was Sarah Chen. The policies totaled nearly $2 million. As Marcus sat back, on his heels, the implications crashing over him like a tsunami, he heard the sound of a car door slamming in his driveway. Through the side gate, he could see red and blue lights reflecting off the windows of his house. The police had arrived, exactly as Sarah must have known they would when she made her phone call 20 minutes ago, which meant she'd been watching him from the kitchen window, waiting to see what he would find, ready to make sure that whatever he discovered would be framed in exactly the right way. Marcus looked down at the insurance policies in his hands, then at Emma's phone and necklace, still sitting in their concrete grave, and realized that he'd been demolishing the wrong thing. The pool wasn't the cover-up. He was. Detective Ray Castellanos had been working missing persons cases for 12 years, long enough to recognize the difference between a genuine search for answers and a performance designed to create reasonable doubt. As he walked through the side gate into the Chen family's backyard, his practiced eye took in the scene with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen too many crime scenes disguised as accidents. The husband stood in the center of what used to be a swimming pool, surrounded by debris and holding what appeared to be documents. His clothes were filthy, his face streaked with sweat and concrete dust, and his entire body language screamed guilt to anyone trained to read it. But it was the wife who interested Castellanos more. Sarah Chen stood on the patio in her work clothes, arms crossed, watching her husband with the kind of detached observation usually reserved for strangers. No tears, no panic, no rush to explain or defend. Just watching. Mrs. Chen. Castellanos called out as he approached. I'm Detective Castellanos. You called about your husband finding something related to your daughter's disappearance. That's right. Sarah's voice was steady, professional. I think you need to see what he's dug up. The choice of words wasn't accidental, Castellanos noted. Not what is found, but what he's dug up, creating a narrative before the investigation had even begun. Marcus looked up from the hole in the concrete, his face a mixture of desperation and growing awareness that he was being maneuvered into something he didn't understand. Detective, there's been a misunderstanding. My wife. Why don't you show me what you found, Mr. Chen? Castellanos interrupted, his voice carefully neutral. He'd learned years ago that letting suspects talk too much in the initial moments usually gave them rope to hang themselves with later. Marcus hesitated, glancing between the detective and his wife. The insurance documents felt like they were burning holes in his hands. Every instinct told him to explain, to provide context, to make Castellanos understand that this wasn't what it looked like. But another part of his mind, the part that had been married to Sarah for 15 years, recognized the trap being constructed around him. I was demolishing the pool, Marcus began slowly, and I found a section that had been repaired recently. When I broke through it, there was a hollow space underneath with some of Emma's belongings. Castellanos approached the edge of the former pool, his flashlight beam joining Marcus's in illuminating the makeshift grave. Emma's phone caught the light, its cracked screen reflecting their faces back at them like a broken mirror. Emma's your stepdaughter? Castellanos asked, though he already knew the answer from the missing person report filed 18 months ago. Yes. She's been gone since last July. We reported it. I remember the case. Castellanos knelt down and examined the space without touching anything. And you just happened to decide to demolish your pool right over the spot where these items were buried. The question hung in the air like a noose. Marcus realized that every answer he could give would sound either impossibly coincidental or deliberately incriminating. I've been thinking about taking the pool down for months, Marcus said. It needed work, and we haven't used it since since she left. The demolition was my way of dealing with the stress. Castellanos stood up and pulled out his phone. And the documents you're holding. Marcus looked down at the insurance policies, their significance becoming clearer with each passing second. I don't know what these are. I just found them with Emma's things. You don't know what they are, but you pulled them out of the hiding spot and opened them. I was curious, Marcus. Sarah's voice cut through his explanation like a blade. Maybe you should call a lawyer. The suggestion landed like a physical blow. Marcus stared at his wife, understanding flooding through him with the force of revelation. She wasn't trying to protect him by suggesting a lawyer. She was making sure that everyone present, especially Detective Castellanos, understood that he needed protection. Why would I need a lawyer? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's expression was a masterpiece of conflicted emotion, love warring with duty, loyalty battling with moral obligation. But Marcus could see through it now, could recognize the performance for what it was. Because, she said, her voice breaking just enough to sound authentic, I'm starting to think you know more about Emma's disappearance than you've been telling me. Castellanos watched this exchange with the kind of professional interest that comes from years of studying human behavior at its most desperate. In his experience, families fell apart in predictable ways when tragedy struck. But this felt different. This felt orchestrated. Mrs. Chen, he said carefully, when did you first suspect your husband might be involved in Emma's disappearance? I didn't want to believe it, Sarah said, wrapping her arms around herself as if seeking comfort. But there were signs. Emma had been acting strange around Marcus in the weeks before she left. Nervous. Avoiding him. And then when she disappeared, Marcus seemed more relieved than worried. That's not true, Marcus said, but his protest sounded weak even to himself. Because there had been tension between him and Emma in those final weeks. There had been arguments. Slammed doors, the kind of stepfather-stepdaughter conflict that happens in blended families every day. The life insurance policies, Castellanos said, nodding toward the documents in Marcus's hands. When were those taken out? Marcus opened the folder again, his hand shaking as he read the dates. These are all from the past 2 years. But Sarah's name is on them as the beneficiary, not mine. I never took out any life insurance policies on Emma, Sarah said quickly. Why would I? She was 17 years old. Castellanos held out his hand for the documents. As he flipped through them, his expression grew increasingly grim. These are legitimate policies, Mr. Chen. Multiple companies, multiple agents. Someone put a lot of effort into acquiring this much coverage on a minor. But I didn't. Marcus stopped himself, realizing the futility of protests that contradicted the physical evidence in the detective's hands. The signatures on these applications, Castellanos continued, they'll need to be verified. But at first glance, they appear to be yours, Mr. Chen. The words hit Marcus like a sledgehammer to the chest. He looked at the documents again, studying the signatures that did indeed look like his handwriting. Not identical, but close enough to fool. An insurance company's review process. Sarah, he said, turning to his wife with growing desperation, you have to know I didn't do this. We've been together for 15 years. You know me. But Sarah's expression had changed. The conflicted pain was gone, replaced by something colder. And more resolute. I thought I knew you, she said. But people can hide things, Marcus. Especially when they're planning something terrible. Castellanos was already on his phone, calling for backup and a crime scene unit. The backyard that had been Marcus's private demolition project was about to become the center of a murder investigation. Mr. Chen, Castellanos said, putting his phone away, I'm going to need you to come down to the station for questioning. This is voluntary right now, but given what we found here, I'd strongly recommend you exercise your right to an attorney. Marcus felt the walls of his life collapsing around him with the same inexorable force he'd used to destroy the pool. Everything he'd thought he was doing, seeking truth, finding closure, dealing with grief, had been transformed into evidence of his guilt. But as he watched Sarah comfort Detective Castellanos, providing him with dates and details about Emma's final weeks, Marcus realized something that chilled him more than the prospect of arrest. Sarah wasn't just cooperating with the investigation. She was leading it. Every piece of information she offered, every seemingly reluctant revelation about his behavior, every careful suggestion about where to look for more evidence, it all painted the same picture. Marcus as the grieving stepfather whose grief had turned dark and dangerous. Marcus as the man who had taken out life insurance policies on his stepdaughter and then made sure to collect on them. Marcus as the killer. And the most terrifying part was how perfectly it all fit together. The insurance policies with his forged signature. Emma's belongings hidden exactly where his demolition work would uncover them. Sarah's phone call to police, timed precisely to catch him with the evidence in his hands. It was brilliant, methodical, and absolutely devastating. As Castellanos guided him toward the front of the house, Marcus caught sight of his neighbor Pete Kowalski watching from his front yard. Pete raised his hand in what might have been a wave or might have been something else entirely. Pete, Marcus called out desperately. Tell the detective what you said about the pool. About hearing me talk to a contractor. Pete looked confused for a moment, then shook his head slowly. Sorry, Marcus. I don't remember saying anything like that. I just remember you being out there for days, digging around like you were looking for something specific. Another piece of the frame clicking into place. Marcus realized that Pete's comment about the contractor had been the catalyst that started his demolition project. But Pete didn't remember making that comment, which meant it had never happened. Sarah had been standing at that kitchen window for 18 months, watching him grieve and rage and slowly lose his mind with guilt and suspicion. And she'd been The interview room at the Riverside County Sheriff's Department smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. Marcus had been sitting in the same metal chair for 3 hours, watching Detective Castellanos arrange and rearrange evidence photos like a dealer shuffling cards. Each image was a nail in his coffin. The insurance policies, Emma's belongings in their concrete tomb, the demolished pool that now looked less like grief therapy and more like a crime scene cleanup operation. Your wife is very concerned about you, Marcus, Castellanos said without looking up from the photos. She says you've been obsessed with Emma's disappearance since day one. Couldn't let it go. Couldn't accept that sometimes teenagers just run away. Marcus's lawyer, David Brennan, was a thin man with nervous energy who specialized in white-collar crime and looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted. He'd advised Marcus to say nothing, but silence felt like admission in the face of such overwhelming circumstantial proof. Emma didn't run away, Marcus said quietly. She left her insulin behind. A diabetic doesn't run away without their medication. Unless someone wanted it to look like she didn't run away, Castellanos replied. Unless someone needed a reason to keep searching, keep digging, keep the case active in everyone's mind while they figured out their next move. The detective finally looked up, his eyes flat and professional. The medical examiner's preliminary report on the items we found in your backyard is interesting. Emma's phone shows she received several text messages on the day she disappeared. Messages from your number. Marcus. Want to guess what they said? Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd never sent Emma any texts that day. He'd been at work, dealing with a crisis at the construction site that had kept him busy until well after she was reported missing. I'd like to see those messages, David said, speaking for the first time in an hour. Castellanos slid a printed report across the table. July 15th, 2:30 p.m. Emma, we need to talk about what happened last night. Meet me by the pool when you get home. July 15th, 3:45 p.m. Don't ignore me. This won't go away just because you're avoiding it. July 15th, 4:20 p.m. I'm sorry if I scared you. Just come home and we'll figure this out together. David read the messages twice before sliding the paper back. These could have been sent by anyone with access to Mr. Chen's phone. Could have been, Castellanos agreed. But they weren't. We've got cell tower data showing Marcus's phone was in the vicinity of his house when these messages were sent. We've also got his work foreman saying he left the construction site early that day due to a family emergency. Marcus stared at the detective, his mind racing. He remembered July 15th with crystalline clarity because it was the day his life had changed forever. He'd been dealing with a concrete delivery that had arrived with the wrong specifications, a problem that had kept him on site until nearly 6 p.m. There had been no family emergency, no early departure, no text messages to Emma. But apparently, there was evidence to the contrary. This is impossible, Marcus said, ignoring David's sharp look of warning. I never sent those messages. I was at work all day dealing with a concrete problem. You can check with the supplier. We did, Castellanos interrupted. Riverside. Concrete says their delivery to your site that day was routine. No problems, no delays. Driver was in and out by noon. Another piece of his alibi crumbling to dust. Marcus looked at David, whose expression had shifted from confident advocacy to worried damage control. Detective, David said carefully, my client is clearly distraught by these allegations. Perhaps we could take a break. Actually, we're just getting to the interesting part. Castellanos pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the first. See, Marcus, when someone disappears and there's insurance money involved, we have to look at the financial picture. And your financial picture is illuminating. The folder contained bank statements, credit reports, and what appeared to be a forensic accounting analysis. Marcus recognized his account numbers, but the activity shown in the statements made no sense. Large cash withdrawals in the weeks leading up to Emma's disappearance. Payments to companies he'd never heard of. A pattern of financial behavior that suggested someone planning for a major life change. These aren't my transactions, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction even to himself. The account numbers were correct, the signatures on the withdrawal. Slips looked like his handwriting, and the timing painted a devastating picture of premeditation. June 20th, Castellanos read from the statements. Cash withdrawal, $5,000. June 28th, payment to Midwest Relocation Services, $3,200. July 2nd, cash withdrawal, $8,000. July 8th, payment to something called Permanent Solutions LLC, $15,000. David leaned forward. What's Permanent Solutions LLC? Good question. Turns out it's a shell company that was dissolved 3 days after Emma disappeared. But here's the interesting part. The company was registered to a P.O. box that Marcus Chen rented under an assumed name 6 months before Emma went missing. The room seemed to tilt around Marcus. He gripped the edge of the table, trying to process information that couldn't possibly be true but was supported by documentation that looked absolutely legitimate. I never rented a P.O. box, he said. I never paid any company called Permanent Solutions. Those aren't my transactions. Your wife seemed to think you might say that, Castellano said. She mentioned that you'd been acting paranoid lately, claiming people were trying to frame you for things you'd actually done. She was worried about your mental state. The trap was even more sophisticated than Marcus had realized. Sarah hadn't just planted evidence and forged documents. She'd spent months establishing a pattern of behavior that would explain away any denials he might make. His claims of innocence would be dismissed as paranoid delusions. His protests about being framed would be seen as the desperate lies of a guilty man. Detective, David interjected, without actual proof that my client committed these transactions himself. Oh, we've got proof. Castellanos smiled for the first time since the interrogation began. Security camera footage from the bank shows Marcus making these withdrawals personally. We've also got surveillance footage from the post office when he rented the P.O. box. And here's my personal favorite. We've got video of him meeting with a man identified as Thomas Richter, who runs let's call it a specialized cleaning service, on July 12th, 3 days before Emma disappeared. Castellanos produced a tablet and showed them a grainy but recognizable security camera image. Marcus stared at the screen, watching himself shake hands with a man he'd never seen before in a parking lot he'd never visited. The timestamp showed July 12th, 2:30 p.m., a day when Marcus clearly remembered being homesick with food poisoning. Who is Thomas Richter? David asked. Professional cleaner. The kind who specializes in making problems disappear permanently. He's been suspected in 3 missing persons cases over the past 5 years, but we've never been able to make anything stick. Until now. Marcus felt like he was drowning in fabricated evidence. Every piece of documentation, every security camera image, every financial transaction painted the same picture. A man methodically planning the murder of his stepdaughter for insurance money, using professional help to ensure the crime would never be discovered. The only problem was that none of it had actually happened. But as Marcus sat in that interrogation room, surrounded by evidence of crimes he'd never committed, documented meetings he'd never attended, and financial transactions he'd never authorized, he began to understand the true scope of what Sarah had done. This wasn't just about framing him for Emma's murder. This was about creating an entirely alternate version of reality in which he was guilty of everything they accused him of. There's one more thing, Castellano said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Thomas Richter was arrested yesterday on an unrelated charge. And guess what? He's decided to cooperate with law enforcement in exchange for a reduced sentence. Marcus's blood turned to ice. What does that mean? It means he's willing to testify that you hired him to dispose of Emma's body for $50,000 cash. He says you were very specific about wanting it done in a way that would never be discovered, which is why he recommended the concrete burial in your own backyard. Said you told him it was the last place anyone would look. The room was completely silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Marcus stared at Castellanos, trying to comprehend how someone could construct such an elaborate fiction and make it appear absolutely real. He's lying, Marcus said finally. Maybe. But he's got details, Marcus. Details about your house, about Emma, about conversations you allegedly had with him. Details that someone would only know if they'd actually been there. David was frantically taking notes, but Marcus could see the defeat in his lawyer's posture. The evidence was too comprehensive, too well documented, too professionally assembled to be anything other than the truth. Except that Marcus knew it was all fabricated. Which meant Sarah had help. Professional help. The kind of assistance that could create false identities, forge documents, manipulate security cameras, and pay a career criminal to provide testimony that would seal her husband's fate. I want to make a phone call, Marcus said suddenly. You've already called your lawyer. Not to my lawyer. To my wife. The Costa Rica lead went cold within hours. By the time Detective Castellanos contacted international authorities, Sarah Chen had vanished into the labyrinthine network of Central American money laundering operations that specialized in helping wealthy Americans disappear. Her credit cards went dark, her phone turned off, and her carefully constructed new identity, built over months of preparation, proved as professionally assembled as the frame job she'd left behind. Marcus remained in custody, facing first degree Murder charges that District Attorney Patricia Walsh called one of the most premeditated and callous crimes she'd prosecuted in 20 years. The media had picked up the story, turning him into the face of domestic evil, the stepfather who'd murdered his teenage stepdaughter for insurance money, then tried to destroy the evidence by demolishing his own backyard. But 3 days after Sarah's confession call, Marcus got an unexpected visitor. Emma Rodriguez, formerly Emma Chen, walked into the county jail's visiting room alive, furious, and accompanied by a lawyer who specialized in witness protection cases. "Hello, Marcus," she said, settling into the plastic chair across from him. At 19, Emma had grown into the kind of young woman who commanded attention without trying. Her dark hair was shorter now, her face more angular, but her eyes held the same fierce intelligence that had always reminded Marcus of her mother. "I hear my stepmother has been busy." Marcus stared at her, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Emma? But you're dead. The insurance policies, evidence. I'm very much alive, thanks to some help from people who knew what Sarah was planning." Emma's voice carried an edge of steel that hadn't been there when she was 17. "The question is whether you're going to stay alive long enough for us to prove your innocence." Emma's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Reeves, opened a thick folder and spread documents across the table. "Mr. Chen, my client has information that could exonerate you completely. But first, we need to know, are you willing to help us catch Sarah?" "I don't understand. If Emma's alive, then what was Sarah planning? Why frame me for a murder that never happened?" Emma leaned forward, her expression grim. "Because the murder was supposed to happen. Sarah's plan wasn't to frame you for something you didn't do. It was to frame you for something she was going to do. She needed me dead to collect the insurance money, and she needed you to take the blame so she could disappear with the proceeds." Catherine slid a photograph across the table. It showed Sarah meeting with a man Marcus didn't recognize in what appeared to be a restaurant. "This is Dr. Martin Voss, a psychiatrist who lost his license 3 years ago for falsifying patient records. Sarah hired him to create a psychological profile that would support her claim that you were mentally unstable and obsessed with Emma." The paranoid behavior she mentioned to Detective Castellanos, Marcus realized. Exactly. Dr. Voss was preparing to testify that you'd been his patient, that you'd expressed violent fantasies about Emma, and that he'd warned Sarah you were dangerous. All fabricated, but it would have been devastating at trial. Emma picked up the narrative. "Sarah spent 18 months setting this up. The insurance policies were real. She forged your signature and paid the premiums herself. The financial evidence was manufactured by a team of professionals who specialize in creating false documentation for people who need new identities. But why kill you at all? Why not just divorce me and disappear with whatever money she could get?" Emma's expression darkened. "Because I knew something. Something that would have destroyed Sarah's reputation, her law practice, and her carefully constructed life." Catherine opened another folder, this one containing what appeared to be legal documents. Emma discovered that Sarah had been embezzling money from her law firm's client trust accounts, over $2 million over the past 3 years. She was using the insurance money to cover the theft, but she needed Emma dead to ensure her secret stayed safe. Marcus felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "So when Emma disappeared, I ran," Emma said simply. "I found evidence of the embezzlement and confronted Sarah about it. She didn't deny it, but she didn't seem worried either. That's when I realized how dangerous she was. So I took the evidence and disappeared before she could eliminate the only witness to her crimes." "The FBI has been tracking Sarah's financial crimes for 6 months, Catherine added. "Emma contacted them when she realized the scope of what Sarah was planning. They've been using her as a confidential informant while building their case." Marcus stared at Emma, seeing her clearly for the first time since she'd walked into the room. "You've been in witness protection." Unofficial witness protection. "The FBI couldn't risk Sarah discovering I was alive before they were ready to move. But when you started demolishing the pool and she accelerated her timeline, we had to act." "The concrete burial site," Marcus said, understanding dawning. "She planted Emma's belongings there knowing I'd find them during the demolition. She needed physical evidence to support the murder charges. But she also needed you to find it in a way that looked suspicious. Your demolition project was perfect. It gave her a reason for the evidence to be discovered, and it made you look guilty. of trying to destroy a crime scene. Catherine leaned back in her chair. The beauty of Sarah's plan was that even if you proved your innocence of the murder charges, you'd still be ruined. Your reputation destroyed, your finances depleted by legal fees, your life effectively over. She could disappear with the insurance money while you spent years rebuilding from nothing. But now that Emma's alive, the insurance policies are worthless. Not exactly, Emma said grimly. Sarah filed the death claim 6 months ago, using falsified evidence of my demise. She's already received payouts totaling $1.8 million from 4 different insurance companies. Marcus felt a chill of understanding, which means she's not just guilty of attempted murder and fraud. She's guilty of insurance fraud on a massive scale. And embezzlement, money laundering, identity theft, and conspiracy, Catherine added. The FBI has enough evidence to put her away for life, but first they have to find her. That's where you come in, Emma said. Sarah thinks you're safely locked up and I'm safely dead. She doesn't know we've figured out her plan or that law enforcement is hunting her, which means she'll feel secure enough to make contact with people from her old life. Marcus shook his head. I've been in jail for 3 days. How could I possibly help find her? Catherine smiled for the first time since she'd arrived, because Sarah made one crucial mistake. She's not just a criminal, she's a narcissist, and narcissists can't resist the opportunity to gloat over their victories. She slid a small recording device across the table. The FBI is going to arrange for your release on bail tomorrow. When you get home, you're going to find that Sarah has left you a message. Something she recorded before she fled, timed to be discovered after your arrest. In that message, she's going to confess to everything, because she can't resist the chance to prove how much smarter she is than everyone else. And when I find this message, you're going to call the number she provides and tell her exactly what she wants to hear. That you're broken, that she's won, that you'll do whatever she wants to make this stop. Emma's eyes were hard as stone. Sarah needs to believe she's completely destroyed you before she can truly enjoy her victory. She'll arrange a meeting to savor your humiliation in person. And when she does, Catherine concluded, the FBI will be waiting. Marcus looked between Emma and the lawyer, understanding the scope of what they were proposing. You want to use me as bait. We want to give you the chance to take back control of your life, Emma said. Sarah has spent 18 months manipulating you, using your love for our family against you, making you dance to her tune without even knowing it. This is your opportunity to turn the tables. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing everything they'd told him. Finally, he looked up at Emma, seeing not the frightened teenager who'd disappeared 18 months ago, but a young woman who'd survived something that would have destroyed most people. What happened that night? He asked quietly. The night Sarah tried to kill you. Emma's expression grew distant. She invited me for a talk by the pool. Said she wanted to clear the air about the embezzlement, maybe work out a way for me to keep quiet without involving the authorities. I was naive enough to believe her. But you got suspicious. I got smart. Something about the way she was acting felt wrong, so I hid a recording device in my jacket before I went outside. When she started talking about how sorry she was that things had to end this way, I knew I was right to be paranoid. Emma pulled out her phone and showed Marcus an audio file. I've got her whole confession on here. How she planned to drug me, stage my death as a drowning accident, then gradually shift suspicion to you over the following months. She was going to be the grieving mother seeking justice for her murdered daughter. But you ran instead. I ran, and she had to improvise. Instead of a murder followed by a frame job, she had to create a frame job that could work without a body. Much more complicated, much riskier, but she was committed by then. Marcus shook his head in amazement. And she almost pulled it off. She did pull it off, Catherine corrected. The video message was waiting on Marcus's laptop when he returned home, just as Catherine had predicted. Sarah had recorded it in what appeared to be a hotel room, her hair styled perfectly, her makeup flawless, every inch the successful attorney, who'd spent her career outmaneuvering opponents in court. Hello, Marcus, she began, her voice warm with false affection. If you're watching this, then my plan has worked even better than I imagined. You're probably sitting in our house, my house now, I suppose, wondering how someone you loved and trusted could destroy your life so completely. Marcus sat in their kitchen, the same kitchen where Sarah had watched him through the window as he demolished the pool, and felt a cold fury building in his chest. The FBI surveillance van parked across the street was invisible from his angle, but knowing it was there gave him strength. The truth is, Marcus, you made this so easy. Your guilt over Emma's unhappiness, your need to fix everything, your pathetic desire to be the perfect stepfather, it was all so predictable. When Emma threatened to expose my business arrangements, I knew exactly how to handle the situation. Sarah paused to sip what looked like champagne, a detail that spoke volumes about her current state of mind. The insurance policies were inspired. Don't you think? Your signature was surprisingly easy to forge. You really should work on your penmanship, darling. And the financial records, the security footage, the witness testimony. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you have the right resources and 18 months to plan. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Castellanos, who was coordinating with the FBI, recording everything. Keep her talking when she calls. I know you're probably wondering about Emma, Sarah continued on the screen. Whether she suffered, whether she was afraid, whether she thought about you in her final moments. The truth is, I'll never tell you. Exactly what happened that night by the pool. That's a secret I'll take with me to my grave, or in this case, to my beach house in Costa Rica. The laptop screen flickered, and suddenly Sarah was looking directly into the camera with an expression of pure malice. But I will tell you this, Marcus. When I'm done destroying your life, when you've lost everything and everyone you ever cared about, when you're sitting in a prison cell for the next 40 years wondering how it all went wrong, remember that you brought this on yourself. If you'd minded your own business, if you'd been content with your mediocre little life and your mediocre little job, Emma would still be alive and you'd still be happily married to a woman who was stealing millions of dollars right under your nose. The message ended with a phone number displayed on screen and Sarah's final words, "Call me when you're ready to beg for my forgiveness. I'm looking forward to hearing how completely I've broken you." Marcus stared at the screen for a long moment, then picked up his phone and dialed the number. Sarah answered on the first ring. "That was quick," she said, sounding pleased. "I thought it might take you a few days to work up the courage." "Sarah." Marcus's voice was carefully controlled, pitched to sound like a man on the edge of collapse. "Why did you do this to me?" "Oh, Marcus. You sound so lost, so confused. It's actually quite touching. I loved you. I loved Emma. I thought we were a family." "We were never a family, darling. We were a convenient arrangement that outlived its usefulness. You provided respectability and a stable home for Emma while I built my practice and my other income streams. But when Emma became a liability, choices had to be made." Marcus closed his eyes, remembering Emma's words about Sarah's confession by the pool. "Tell me what happened to her. Please. I need to know." "What you need to know is that you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison for her murder. The evidence is overwhelming, your mental state is clearly deteriorating, and even your own lawyer thinks you're guilty. The FBI knows you embezzled the money, Sarah. They're going to find you." Sarah's laugh was like breaking glass. "The FBI? Oh, Marcus, you really are more naive than I thought. The FBI can't touch me here, and even if they could, what evidence do they have? Some missing money from client accounts that could have been taken by anyone with access? Some insurance policies that you signed? I've covered my tracks very carefully. Emma's alive, Sarah." The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus thought the call might have dropped. When Sarah spoke again, her voice had lost all its warmth and amusement. "That's impossible. She's alive, and she's talking to the FBI. About the embezzlement. About your plan to kill her. About everything you've done over the past 18 months. You're lying. I saw her body." Sarah stopped herself, but the admission hung in the air like a confession. "You saw her body." Marcus pressed. "I thought she ran away, Sarah. I thought she disappeared voluntarily. How could you have seen her body unless you killed her yourself?" Another long silence. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was flat and dangerous. "Where are you calling from, Marcus?" "Home. Our house. Where you left me to rot while you disappeared with blood money. And you're alone." Marcus glanced toward the window where he could see the FBI van. "Completely alone. Just like you planned. Good. Because we need to meet in person to discuss this. Complication. There's a warehouse at 2847 Industrial Boulevard in Riverside. Be there in 1 hour, and come alone. If you bring anyone with you, if you contact the police, if you do anything other than exactly what I'm telling you to do, I'll disappear forever and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering whether Emma is really alive or whether this was just another psychological game designed to torture you. Sarah, 1 hour, Marcus. And bring the recording device I'm sure someone gave you to wire this conversation. We are going to settle this face to face, the way it should have been settled 18 months ago. The line went dead. Marcus looked at his phone, realizing that Sarah was even more dangerous than they'd anticipated. She'd seen through their plan immediately, which meant she was probably planning to eliminate both him and Emma permanently before disappearing again. 20 minutes later, Marcus sat in the back of an unmarked FBI vehicle heading toward Industrial Boulevard, surrounded by agents who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. She knows it's a trap, Agent Patricia Mills said for the third time. This could be an ambush designed to take out both you and Emma before we can intervene. Maybe, Marcus replied, adjusting the wire concealed under his shirt. But it's also the first time in 18 months that I've had any control over what happens next. I'm not walking away from that. Emma sat across from him in the van, her face pale but determined. Sarah's desperate now. Desperate people make mistakes. They also make bodies, Agent Mills pointed out grimly. The warehouse was exactly what Marcus had expected, a sprawling industrial building in a part of town where gunshots wouldn't attract much attention. FBI snipers had taken positions on surrounding buildings, but everyone understood that if Sarah had professional help, and given the sophistication of her frame job, she almost certainly did, this could go sideways very quickly. Remember, Agent Mills said as they approached the building, your job is to get her talking and keep her talking. Admission of guilt, details about Emma's murder, anything about the insurance fraud. We need her to confess to something we can use in court. And if she tries to kill me, then we'll intervene. But Marcus, if this goes bad, if she's got people inside that building waiting for us, you need to understand that our priority is capturing Sarah alive. We can't let her escape again. Marcus nodded, understanding the implication. His life was expendable if it meant bringing Sarah to justice. The warehouse door was unlocked, leading into a vast space filled with shipping containers and industrial equipment. Sarah stood in the center of the space, no longer the polished attorney from a video message. Her clothes were wrinkled, her makeup smeared, and her eyes held the kind of wild desperation that comes from watching a perfect plan collapse in real time. Hello, Marcus, she said as he approached. I have to admit, I'm impressed. When I planned your destruction, I never imagined you'd be smart enough to figure out the game, let alone bold enough to try to turn the tables. Where's Emma's body? Sarah. Emma's body. Sarah smiled, but it was the expression of someone who'd moved far beyond rational thought. That's the beautiful irony of this whole situation, Marcus. There is no body, because I never actually killed Emma. Marcus felt the world tilt around him. What are you talking about? I mean, I never murdered your precious stepdaughter. Oh, I planned to. I had everything arranged, the perfect accident by the pool, the gradual shift of suspicion to you over the following months. But Emma ran before I could implement the final stage. Then why did you let me believe she was dead? Why frame me for a murder that never happened? Sarah's laugh echoed through the empty warehouse. Because I realized that a missing girl was even better than a dead one. With a dead body, there's evidence, forensics, the possibility of mistakes. But with a missing person who might or might not be dead, I could control the narrative completely. I could make you believe anything I wanted you to believe. The insurance. Money. Oh, I collected every penny. Death certificates are surprisingly easy to forge when you know the right people. The insurance companies never questioned the claims Becca